Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. My name is Siewnarine Geelalsingh, and I would like to welcome you to our program, Our Islam, Peace, Not Hostility. This program is brought to you by the Ahmadiyya Anjuman Ishati Islam Incorporated of Trinidad and Tobago, an organization that promotes a peaceful Islam, a tolerant Islam, an intelligent Islam, an organization that promotes the pristine Islam as taught by the Holy Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. Join us now for this week's message.
We know COVID-19 has plagued Trinidad for just over a year, and we're still living in similar conditions now as we did in April 2020. We're all familiar with the impacts of the coronavirus: job loss, social restrictions, closure of schools and borders, just to name a few. While there have been some positive effects as well, such as persons being afforded with more time to build family relations, as well as the expansion and convenience of technological resources, COVID-19 has and still continues to affect the mental health of many persons. A recent study out of the US showed that persons who were afflicted with anxiety and depressive symptoms quadrupled in their reports of such over the course of the pandemic. Can you imagine that? These symptoms just exploded with people having to deal with COVID-19. What does that mean for us? Many of us have taken comfort in the fact that we can adjust to the new normal. Now, normal is a relative word. It changes across cultures, time, and circumstance. Wearing a mask, washing our hands, social distancing, these are all actions. These are things that we can control. We can decide if we want to do these things or not. We can observe the consequences of not doing them, and as well, we can observe the benefits of following these guidelines. So good, right? We've adjusted, everything's fine, we have everything sorted. Have we though? Humans are social beings. We have an innate need for love and belongingness. We require human interaction. Now, the new normal does not change that need. As much as we would like to think that we feel adjusted, as much as we think that the phone is going to help us keep in touch with those around us, keep in touch with our friends, it still is not going to satisfy that need that we have for a hug or for a kiss, or to just be in the physical company of someone who helps us to relate to ourselves, who helps us to express our emotions. There really isn't anything that can take the place of that. Social distancing, closure of social spaces, and or restrictions against social interaction lead then to social isolation. And we've spoken about social isolation before when we talked about depression and when we talk about suicide. So if COVID-19 is really creating a space where social isolation is increased, then what it's really doing is it's creating an environment for depression and for suicidality, but that's something we'll talk about another time. So this social isolation, it hinders the perception of being loved, or the feeling as though a person belongs for many people. This has to be one of the most single, severe psychological impacts of COVID-19. Depressive symptoms are more prevalent across societies now than they were 15 months ago. Second to depression, and most certainly not minimized by it at all, is anxiety. Anxiety and depressive symptoms oftentimes go together. They're comorbid, and that means that a person can meet criteria for the two disorders at the same time. So what we're talking about here really is difficulty in coping, and I know it feels as though we're getting through, and a lot of times we say just take one day at a time, but when we're not coping, one day can feel like a week. But of course, given everything that's been happening, we can certainly understand why many people are experiencing these symptoms. Many of these manifestations consistent with an increase in depression or anxiety are actually appropriate responses to the challenges we face, both individually and as a society within this pandemic. Some persons worry, some feel fear, some go into denial, some regress. There are many unknowns, many uncertainties. Even when we see a glimmer of hope, there are still reservations, and we can most certainly see that in our country right now with everything that's happening. Vaccines are being rolled out, but still we're seeing an increase in our numbers, and we have our state of emergency and it seems to be helping, but at the same time a lot of people worry about what's going to happen after the state of emergency. Is there going to be another rise in cases? Are people going to be irresponsible again? What's going to happen? So having said all of this, it really makes it seem as though that there isn't anything any of us can do to remedy this situation. And I would say, to an extent, we have no control. Neither you nor I can really change what's happening now in the world. Now, we can be responsible for our own actions, but we cannot change our neighbors' actions. We cannot force our government to do the things that we want them to do. So one of the things we hear a lot about is opening borders. We can't force that. However, we can make internal changes. So I can change me. I cannot change you. Before I can do that though, before I can change myself, I need to become aware of what's happening with me. What are the patterns in my thinking? Do I get worried whenever someone mentions relationships or financial security or education? What is it that's really bothering me? What's at the core? What's the underlying factor of this thing that's causing my behavior, my thinking, to push me to feel the way that I feel? After establishing a pattern, ask yourself, how can you reframe your perspective? How can you refocus your thoughts? And that's actually the first coping mechanism that we're talking about today when we're talking about adjusting to COVID-19, reframing your perspective. So let's take an example. Arthur is worried about his education. Virtual school is equally a bore and difficult to follow. He has trouble in his assignments. All of his friends are in the same boat as he is. The teacher is no help at all. Arthur fears that he will be left behind and that he has to repeat the year. How can Arthur reframe his perspective? Well, firstly, if all his friends have the same difficulty that he has, he won't be left behind. He might be moving slower, but they're all moving slower. Secondly, repeating a year may not necessarily be a negative thing. He would have already had the exposure to the subject matter, so it would be easier for him to grasp it the second time around. And lastly, he would have learned ways not to do things, and therefore he would have increased in his knowledge. Failure is a ladder. Every time we fail, we learn how not to do something, and then we can climb on that knowledge and eventually be able to succeed. So by reframing his perspective, Arthur has alleviated some of his anxiety. And it's the same thing for you. If you sit down and you really think about a situation and you think about an alternative approach to the situation and you reframe the way you're thinking and you refocus your mind, then you would be able to alleviate some anxiety. Secondly, we're going to talk about finding hope. Now this has to be a favorite coping mechanism of mine. We mentioned about it earlier, hope, and it's just that thing that drives you to believe that things will get better even if you can't see evidence of the fact. So an example of that would be Manuel, who has lived his past year tiptoeing around his aging family members who live with him. His job as a sales clerk brings him in contact with many persons. Now, while the store policies enforce COVID-19 protocols, he can never really be sure about a person's sanitization habits. He is at risk from just being outdoors. He worries, he's fearful, he's sad. He eventually quits his job to preserve life at home. But when he does that, he becomes unmotivated. He can't eat, he has trouble sleeping, he doesn't even have a desire to socialize, not even virtually with his friends. Manuel finds himself in a low mood most of the day, every day. The fact that he cannot change the pandemic makes it worse. It makes him feel helpless. How does Manuel find hope in this situation? Well, what he can do is he can begin to remind himself of the positive things that he has to look forward to. So firstly, he may not be able to work now, but he's preserving his life. So as long as he has health, then he will be able to work one day. Secondly, he wouldn't have to be overly concerned about the safety of his family members because of his contact with persons outside the home. So then he's actually taking away the chance that he will feel guilty if anything does happen to them. And lastly, Manuel can remind himself that the vaccine is being distributed. At some point in the future, he and his family would be able to get vaccinated, and in the meantime, others are becoming vaccinated as well, so the risk should be lessening over time. By allowing himself, or rather by determining in himself to find hope in situations, he has created his own internal motivation to push past depressive symptoms, and it's the same thing for you. By allowing yourself and by determining within yourself to find hope, then you create your own internal motivation. I recommend writing it down. Make your own gratitude journal, or rather a hope journal. These go hand in hand, gratitude and hope. Read it daily. Remind yourself. This is a practice you can even maintain after the pandemic. This is something that's going to be useful to you. It's going to help you to even refocus your mind, to reframe your perspective. And over time, you wouldn't have to think too hard about doing these things because you would have gotten so accustomed to it, and it would be one of your new and possibly one of your most helpful coping mechanisms. Lastly, today we're going to talk about alleviating boredom. So how many of us are bored, just at home, nothing to do, eating chips and chocolate, sitting on the couch, having the time of our lives really, but then it gets really old really quickly sometimes. But what we can do is we can repurpose our time. Schedule tasks for the day. Include things like physical activity, catching up with friends, watching a movie, learn something new like cooking or gardening, baking, building things, craft projects, reading a favorite book, and of course, don't forget mindfulness. What do you think that's going to achieve? Well, oftentimes when we're bored, we lose our sense of purpose. We feel ineffective in our environment. Mental stagnancy encourages physical stagnancy, which of course breeds unhealthy habits, and then we can get sick, lifestyle diseases, all these kinds of things. So we put ourselves at risk for. We can get sick, all these lifestyle diseases we put ourselves at risk for. So what am I saying? Prevention is better than cure. Of course, we can have down days where we do nothing or don't do much in the least, but down days should not be every day. What we talked about today are really general coping mechanisms that you can employ throughout your lives. These are not applicable to coping with the effects of COVID-19 only. In a world beyond the pandemic, reframing your perspective, finding hope, and alleviating boredom can act as protective factors against mental health challenges. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you heard something that is helpful to you. I hope you keep safe, be kind, and keep growing.
Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina may yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa may yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Allahumma ansur man nasara dina Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam waj'alna minhum. Allahumma akhzul man khazala dina Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa la taj'alna minhum. All praise is due to Allah. We praise Him and seek His assistance and His protection and believe in Him and trust in Him. We seek refuge in Allah against the evils of our minds and against the unsuccessfulness of our actions. Whomsoever He guides, there is none to lead him astray, and whomsoever He finds in error, there is none to guide him. I bear witness that there is none deserving to be worshipped except the one true God. And I also bear witness that the Holy Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, is His servant and messenger. O Allah, help those who help the religion of Muhammad and count us among them. O Allah, disappoint those who try to disgrace the religion of Muhammad and do not make us of those. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad. كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. O Allah, exalt Muhammad and the true followers of Muhammad, as Thou didst exalt Abraham and the true followers of Abraham. Surely Thou art praised, magnified. O Allah, bless Muhammad and the true followers of Muhammad, as Thou didst bless Abraham and the true followers of Abraham. Surely Thou art praised, magnified. Inna Allaha ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i zil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'izzukum la'allakum tazakkarun. Ibadallah uzkurullah yazkurukum war'uhu yastajib lakum wa lazikrullahi akbar. Surely Allah enjoins the doing of justice and the doing of good to others and giving to the kindred, and He forbids indecency and evil and rebellion. He admonishes you that you may be mindful. O servants of Allah, remember Allah and He will raise you. Call on Him and He will answer you. Surely remembrance of Allah is greater than everything. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Was-samaa'i zaatil buruj wal yawmil maw'ud wa shahidin wa mashhud. قتل أصحاب الأخدود النار ذات الوقود إذ هم عليها قعود وهم على ما يفعلون بالمؤمنين شهود وما نقموا منهم إلا أن يؤمنوا بالله العزيز الحميد الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض والله على كل شيء شهيد. إن الذين فتنوا المؤمنين والمؤمنات ثم لم يتوبوا فلهم عذاب جهنم ولهم عذاب الحريق. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ذلك الفوز الكبير. إن بطش ربك لشديد وإنه هو يبدئ ويعيد وهو الغفور الودود ذو العرش المجيد فأحلل لما يريد. هل أتاك حديث الجنود فرعون وثمود بل الذين كفروا في تكذيب والله من ورائهم محيط بل هو قرآن مجيد في لوح محفوظ. آمين.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Praise be to Allah, the originator of the heavens and the earth, the maker of the angels, messengers flying on wings, 2 and 3 and 4. He increases in creation what He pleases. Surely Allah is possessor of power over all things. Whatever Allah grants the man of His mercy, there is none to withhold it. And what He withholds, none can grant thereafter. And He is the mighty, the wise. O man, call to mind the favor of Allah to you. Is there any creator besides Allah who provides for you from the heaven and the earth? There is no God but He. How are you then turned away? And if they reject thee, truly messengers before thee were rejected, and to Allah are all affairs returned. O man, surely the promise of Allah is true, so let not the life of this world deceive you, and let not the arch deceiver deceive you about Allah. Surely the devil is your enemy, so take him for an enemy. He only invites his party to be companions of the burning fire. Those who disbelieve, for them is a severe chastisement. And those who believe and do good, for them is forgiveness and a great reward. Is he whose evil deed is made fair seeming to him, so that he considers it good? Now surely Allah leaves in error whom He pleases, and guides aright whom He pleases. So let not thy soul waste in grief for them. Surely Allah is knower of what they do. And Allah is He who sends the winds, so they raise a cloud. Then we drive it onto a dead land, and therewith give light to the earth after its death, and so is the quickening. Whoever desires might, then to Allah belongs the might wholly. To Him do ascend the goodly words and the goodly deed. He exalts it. And those who plan evil, for them is a severe chastisement, and their plan will perish. And Allah created you from dust, then from the life germ, then He made you pairs. And no female bears, nor brings forth, except with His knowledge. And no one living long is granted a long life, nor is aught diminished of one life, but it is all in a book. Surely this is easy to Allah. And the two seas are not alike, the one sweet, very sweet, pleasant to drink, and the other salt, bitter. Yet from both you eat fresh flesh, and bring forth ornaments which you wear. And thou seest the ships cleave through it, that you may seek of His bounty, and that you may give thanks. He causes the night to enter in upon the day, and causes the day to enter in upon the night. And He has made subservient the sun and the moon. Each one moves to an appointed time. This is Allah, your Lord. His is the kingdom, and those whom you call upon beside him own not a straw. If you call on them, they hear not your call, and if they heard, they could not answer you. And on the day of resurrection, they will deny you associating them with Allah, and none can inform thee like the all-aware one. Amen.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wailul lil mutaffifin. Allazina iza qtalu walan nasi yastawfun. Wa iza qaluhum aw wazanuhum yuksirun. ألا يظن أولئك أنهم مبعوثون ليوم عظيم يوم يقوم الناس لرب العالمين كلا إن كتاب الفجار لفي سجين وما أدراك ما سجين كتاب مرقوم ويل يومئذ للمكذبين الذين يكذبون بيوم الدين وما يكذب به إلا كل معتد نثيم إذا تتلى عليه آياتنا قال أساطير الأولين كلا بل ران على قلوبهم ما كانوا يكسبون كلا إنهم من ربهم يومئذ لمحجوبون ثم إنهم لصال الجحيم ثم يقال هذا الذي كنتم به تكذبون كلا إن كتاب الأبرار لفي عليين وما أدراك ما عليون كتاب مرقوم يشهده المقربون إن الأبرار لفي نعيم على الأرائك ينظرون تعرف في وجوههم نضرة النعيم يسقوا من رحيق مختوم ختامه مسك وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون ومزاجه من تسنيم أين يشرب بها المقربون إن الذين أجرموا كانوا من الذين آمنوا يضحكون وإذا مروا بهم يتغامزون وإذا انقلبوا إلى أهلهم انقلبوا فكهين وإذا رأوهم قالوا إن هؤلاء لضالون وما أرسلوا عليهم حافظين فاليوم الذين آمنوا من الكفار يضحكون على الأرائك ينظرون هل ثوب الكفار ما كانوا يفعلون آمين.
Thank you for joining us. Tune in again next week for another episode of Our Islam, Peace, Not Hostility. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you.